Oh, I had some questions about something, but I don't think they were reactor specific.
Neutronics,
Neutronics.
load following.
Oh yeah, we talked about load following.
So we covered. So nature has stored from supernova. Literally, the energy from a supernova is stored in things like thorium, uranium, plutonium. If you meter it out properly, you can power your civilization for a real long time. And I think it'd be this one we could go more into like what the economic effects of almost limitless energy would be.
I guess that would relate to my question: is there resistance from coal and oil industries? I asked that last time.
Yeah.
Let's go to the economics.
Yeah,
Right.
That makes sense.
Well, I mean, it's interesting because the fossil fuel age is historically it's going to be like, well, it was only about 130 years when fossil fuels dominated the world's energy. For good or for ill, we're either going to transition to a nuclear age or we're going to transition out of fossil fuels without any replacement. So
back to what? Wheat or
Back to Cascadia.
back to the land.
Yeah.
If we don't transition out of fossil fuels into a nuclear future, we will transition back to an agricultural base.
right?
Which
Because
For a while.
Which can't support 7 billion people without the fossil fuels.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. And it's the idea that you can have an electric grid that stays up and running without fossil fuels to maintain it is nonsense. You have to somehow get this equipment even to maintain what's already there. You need there's no substitute for liquid hydrocarbon fuel to get to your transformer and your power line. Yeah, you've got the, Grand Coulee Dam, but if the power lines are breaking down in northern Idaho, and you'd have to ration it so that the only people who get fossil fuels are like the electric companies, just to keep the lights on. It doesn't. Yeah. It's inconceivable.
like to put into trucks to send the teams out.
Yeah.
The maintenance teams, not even to burn for the grid,
Correct.
but just for maintenance.
Yeah.
Basically.
Just to keep the maintenance up and running. Try to imagine. I mean, we've all seen power lines crisscrossing eastern Washington. The wind blew one over in the year 2040. The lights went out on Spokane. How do you get that back up if there's no fossil fuels? It doesn't happen.
Yeah.
This infrastructure will decay away into a dark age if we don't transition to nuclear fuel. You'll just be passing the ruins of a high-rise building or the ruins of these
Gas stations.
Or windmills.
Drive-through businesses.
Yeah.
Sorry.
So what should I imagine when you say dark age? Like, how many dark ages have there been?
Western civilization has been through two.
Right. There was the Bronze Age collapse,
Yes.
and then the one we all know with our medieval knights and shit.
Yes, the collapse of Rome. You have to keep in mind also is that it wasn't Rome in the year 476 and then in the year 477 knights in shining armor.
Right.
There was the real dark age. The early Middle Ages are roughly 500 to about 900, and it's pretty. There's no stone castles during that time, and like feudalism had not developed yet. Pretty low levels of sustenance.
So much so that there's nothing even there for us to romanticize in our movies.
You can't do it. Like there's Charlemagne, and it's like, well, like Charlemagne couldn't read.
The Holy Roman Emperor couldn't read.
Yeah.
Oh,
and
wow.
It was about the lowest level of human development and dignity that you could just about imagine. Like Stone Age peoples living in the Amazon had higher standards of material living and cultural and artistic expression than early Middle Ages Europeans.
Right.
So if we lose if we don't transition out of the fossil fuel age, it will be a future without electricity. It'll be a future without modern medicine. It'll be a future without wastewater treatment. And we'll burn down all of our forests just to cook our food and stay warm in the summer, and then the soil will wash away.
That's going to make it harder to eat.
It will, yeah.
Without soil.
Yeah. It's interesting. I don't want this to be about collapse, but the Greek Dark Ages, the Bronze Age collapse, was even more intense than the Roman collapse because no institution survived at all.
Yeah.
Literally.
Oh, so there's not even like this sort of
Not even the church.
coherence of the church or whatever, right?
But it was only the more intense your Dark Age, the shorter it is because people have ingenuity and they don't just roll over and die. And so the Greek polis emerged around 700 BC, 700, 800 BC. Even 400 years earlier, it was Mycenaean Greece, Agamemnon, Odysseus, these other things. They lost writing. They lost all of their cities. They even lost the memory of writing. If you'll notice, there's no references to writing in the Iliad or Odyssey. There's one incredibly vague suggestion about it. Odysseus never sends a written message to his men. Agamemnon never writes something down and says, go, I want to send my soldiers. It's a completely verbal society, even though Mycenaeans had writing. Because it was Homer during the Dark Ages when those stories were barely remembered,
It's funny that
They even lost the memory of writing.
Yeah, for something like even darkness still follows the old candle that burns twice as bright.
Yes, it does. I really mean it. Like if the Roman Catholic Church had not survived in Europe, the Dark Age might have been more intense, but what would have come out of it would have been better, quote, more original.
Huh.
Yeah.
What allowed the church to survive? I mean,
the early Catholic Church was really quite something. It was nothing like the decadent High Middle Ages. They were sending out missionaries to Vikings, to German tribes, to Britain. Britain went pagan again, and so it was a very dynamic, and these missionaries were getting killed, and so it gave them a lot of credibility. And they were the only game in town. That priest was probably the only person who could write, if even he could.
yeah.
And so the only international institution, really truly, was the Catholic Church.
Yeah.
It was the ultimate arbiter, and here's this guy coming and he's got this incredible book and he's telling you these incredible stories about Adam and Eve and the serpent and all this other stuff to these pagan barbarians who are like, what the fuck is this? And so they kept leveraging that network, and hell, they were the only financial system before the king, the governments arose and the kingship. So yeah, it's good to read about Dark Ages when people are thrown back almost literally on only their own resources. Like, what do you do with just physical labor? Well, you build Europe up, I guess, because Rome is gone.
Yeah.
Overgrown ruins.
I mean, I think I get. It feels vague, but probably fairly complete in my head. But so the term Dark Ages. It's a loss of technology. It's a loss of knowledge. It's a loss of institutions.
Yeah, traditions. Yeah.
So really, something of a singularity.
Yeah.
Where information from this point does not pass to beyond this point.
Yeah, they make the point with the Greek Dark Ages, the Bronze Age collapse. It's like a door shutting and going into a new room. Those cities, those Mycenaean centers, Pylos, Mycenae, Gla.
The famous Klingon
Right.
No.
Gla is cool.
Sorry.
Those big cyclopean walls, they're like, nobody lived there after that. That Pylos was abandoned permanently. It's still nobody's there. And that's over. This is before Sparta. The only one that made it through the Dark Age was Athens, believe it or not. There was a Mycenaean palace up on the Acropolis. It maybe got burned down, but the people remained, so the Athenians were kind of snooty to the other Greeks. They said, we're older than you.
There was some continuity there.
There was a little bit of continuity, barely.
At least,
but they still lost their
geographically.
Writing. Yeah, geographically, yeah. The Attica stayed inhabited, and people still lived in Athens even during the Dark Age. Whereas Mycenae is empty. There's nobody in there.
Yeah.
There's a dog raising puppies on the throne of Agamemnon. You know?
So when is this BCE? What are we talking?
1187 BC.
1187 BC.
Yeah. So you had from about 1700 BC to about 1200 BC. So about 500 years. That's the glorious Bronze Age. This is the glorious time of the Egyptian Empire. This is when there's Ramesses II and King Tut and these others. This is when Babylon is doing really well. And this is the time of the Hittite Empire in central Anatolia.
So we
and
have
Mycenaean
we
Greece.
have records from history.
History.
Real
We
written
have
record,
we
yes.
have
History rather than
hieroglyphs
archaeology.
and cuneiform.
There is written history. We have literally the copper and bronze plates of a peace treaty between the Hittite Empire and the Egyptian Empire. They are sending
Written in what?
Cuneiform, cuneiform and others, but
Gotcha.
cuneiform is the main one.
Okay.
The Hittites were interesting. They were more. They were very diplomatically skilled. They had a school of scribes, and they would write things in like 7 different languages. You know, their own, and
Right.
others. So they called it kind of like the brotherhood of kings, or what do they call it? The kings would address each other. It's the club of great powers. So they're sending missions to each other all the time. They were always inquiring about each other's health. How are you? How are you doing? Oh, I have a cold. Okay, here's some gold and some slaves. Yeah. And they were always, and Babylon and Assyria, they were always bugging Egypt because Egypt was the one who had all the gold. And so they're like, you sent more gold to the Assyrians than you did to me. And fuck off. You know, they have a stronger military than you. Swear to God, we have letters of complaints of a Babylonian king to an Egyptian pharaoh of like, you didn't send as much gold as you did last time on your last emissary. They were just like us. They were just like us. Yeah. No iron. They didn't have iron.
And then 400 years of no written record, or some hundred years.
So yeah, around 1200 things are falling apart. The Sea Peoples, Mycenae implodes. The Hittite Empire implodes and goes away. There is no Hittite king. They ruled Anatolia for 500 years. They fought Egypt. They fought Assyria, and then they're gone. Hattushas, the capital city, sacked and burned and empty to this day.
Sacked and burned by whom?
The Casca, these barbarian tribes to the north.
To the north,
Yeah.
always from the north.
Yeah. Well, the Hittites at one point were barbarians who probably came from the north. Yeah.
So meanwhile, at this time, what's happening in China?
1700 BC in China is the Shang dynasty.
Okay.
They were preceded by the Zhou.
Yeah.
The Shang came in with chariots from the north.
Yeah.
The light chariot
And
was
horses
and
from
horses.
the north.
Yes. So before that, so China's older than that, but they were the similar wave of invaders that brought you the Hyksos, who were foreigners who conquered from the north with chariots, Egypt, by chariot, were distant cousins of people doing a similar thing to the Yellow River Valley in China, and the Wei River Valley. And so the Shang ruled it, and by ruled I mean, it was messy, multiple states and little princely things. And then the Zhou came from the west and the north and conquered them, overthrew them. And that was in 1046 BC.
Did they have a written language at that time?
The Chinese, it was developing. Yeah.
Developing.
Right.
The turtle
These
shells.
are sort of
oracle bones.
Right, oracle bones.
Yeah.
So lovely.
Yeah.
Is it the Joe that like people like semi mythical? I mean, obviously they existed, but later on, like in Kong's time,
Yeah.
is it the Joe that they sort of harken back to, like, back in the semi mythical past when we were upright? I might just be confusing my.
Well, I mean, so the Chinese remembered it, but it did become mythical because they didn't have the archaeology to really pinpoint it. And so they were like, it was in their legends and their stories that they had. They were like, the last Shang king was really evil. Apparently he made himself a pleasure lake filled with wine, and he would have all these cooked meats that he would pluck from tree branches and stuff, and they're like, yeah, you're bad. And the Zhou come in, and that's when you start the idea of the Mandate of Heaven. The Duke of Zhou was. So they remembered even the battle the same way we remember the Trojan War, And then the archaeology, they get these oracle bones and the written stuff, and they're like, oh my God, here's the Zhou. It's not a myth.
Yeah.
Well, no shit.
Yeah.
People don't just say They don't just make things up out of whole cloth.
Right,
Yeah.
but they do sometimes come along with stories about, oh, King so and so
Yeah.
who invented agriculture from
Yeah,
this or that.
They had that.
Yeah, yeah,
Emperor
right.
Yao and Emperor
Right,
Shun. Yeah,
right.
yeah. So those are more mythical. But
Right.
he was probably based on a real person.
Right.
Just a powerful king who maybe had an irrigation project or something.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
I think there was.
irrigation especially.
Oh,
probably.
God, yeah.
Yeah.
I haven't been able to find it again. I think it might be in something Dr. Utes wrote, but I remember hearing a story. I mean, sort of one of these mythical stories about one of these semi-mythical kings or emperors inventing music by cutting reeds to various lengths and getting the pentatonic scale. And like
There
doing,
you go.
yeah.
Wow.
I haven't been able to find it again. I'm sure I could just ask Utes.
Yeah.
He'd
But-
love it if you did.
Yeah, I
would.
haven't talked to him in a while. But
Yeah.
anyway,
So, yeah, I mean, one thing is like the Middle East with Sumer and stuff actually did transition to city states and had a writing system earlier than China. You know, like Egypt is unified 3000 BC for
Yeah.
the first time.
Yeah.
China becomes the Zhou 2,000 years after that.
Right,
You know,
yeah.
1000 BC.
Yeah.
So, yeah, but the difference is we've talked about the continuity of China. China's never had a dark age. We've had two.
right, right. You said you didn't want to talk about collapse, but we'll try and
There-
bring
yeah.
it back to the modern era. So
Yeah.
what should I expect from our looming dark age? And like Muggs reminded us, like if we don't transition and the dark ages do come, how many people can the globe or even our continent, to be more local, support, and how much suffering and cruelty is there in the culling of the
Yeah.
extras?
The
Yep.
zombies.
Yeah.
What does that look like?
It's really bad.
Does it look like starvation, or does it look like tribal warfare, or
Here's how to think about it. You have to walk to Spokane, and there's no towns or electricity or gas stations or restaurants in between here and Spokane.
That's between Tacoma and yeah,
that's a long walk?
That's a long walk.
It's a long
Yeah.
drive.
yeah.
It's a long
About
drive.
300 miles.
Yep.
Yeah.
So if you the mental checklist you go through that is the same checklist you go through to think of collapse. Instead of walking to Spokane, you say I have to walk to the next 40 years without electricity.
So it's
bad.
It's water, food, not dying of exposure, not
meanwhile-
getting waylaid by
meanwhile-
highwaymen.
Yes.
or-
Yeah. The hills.
And meanwhile, the older I get, the more cynical I become about human nature, and that there aren't going to be a lot of people to help you along the way,
No.
because they're looking for the same thing, 300 miles
Yes.
that direction.
Right, and
Right.
now the scarcity is, if not more, at least more obvious.
Yeah, to your question, I read this is 20 or 30 years ago. Somebody estimated how many people can
The biosphere.
the biosphere support. Leave some room for nature. You have to have some natural places. You understand? You can't convert it all into farmland and
Sure.
ranches and
wouldn't
stuff
do
like
you-
that. The estimate at that time was between 2 and 3 billion. I mean, how close can that be? Maybe 2 and 3 billion, but that's leaving room for nature to do its thing, which we humans rely on.
Yeah.
And we have over 7 billion now.
Mm-hmm.
And I think I said it on one of these podcasts that when my dad was born, there were 2. When I was born, there were 3. There's over 7 now, and I'm still alive. And I consume a lot. I fly in airplanes.
Sure.
I drive a car. And everybody wants to live like me.
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
And
Look
that's a big problem.
I mean, the collapse has already begun. Look at countries like Haiti or Egypt or El Salvador, like they are in the process of collapse. They're protesting about what? A reduced standard of living. How do you make it better? I don't know. They're so poor, they migrate to Mexico from El Salvador. That's how poor El Salvador is.
Yeah.
The electric grid starts to flicker out. And so
I mean, what's the kindest way this sort of thing could happen if it does? Is
Cascadia. You have to have a common vision for a common future of we will tend this land, this local geographic area together forever.
where does that leave people who don't get to make it to Cascadia?
I mean, for Cascadia, it's, well, I mean, the death toll will be so high that that's kind of a moot point. Like, take whoever, Cascadia needs all the farmers it can get. You know,
Yeah.
Here's your 5 acres.
Yeah, there'll be Cascadia, plus there'll be California, plus there'll be the Southeast. I mean, it's not just Cascadia.
Everywhere.
It's going to be regions. What is what he's arguing.
Yeah.
Right.
Think of collapse as like contraction as much as anything else. Like the Hittite empire went away, but there were certain city-states that did survive it. Carchemish was the main one. He's not the Hittite king. He can't impose his rule even 5 miles outside of the city walls. And at night, it's only inside the city walls. But people don't just roll over and die. You know, they fight it. And so... But Egypt, Assyria, and Babylon survived, but they lost their hinterland. They weren't empires anymore. They all shrank. So Egypt was able to, in the glorious Bronze Age, after Thutmose III, able to impose its will all the way up to Carchemish, north of Syria today. You know, Egypt ruled Damascus. You know,
Yeah.
and then they didn't. Then it was only the Nile Valley, and then the Nile Valley itself fragmented into multiple polities. It's like the Delta is not ruled by the upper, upstream of the Nile, and even then the Delta broke up into like 6 different polities for a while.
Yeah.
All of them bickering, fighting, squabbling. So it'll be like that, like, oh, the president said we should do this. Who?
Yeah.
Who? I don't care at all.
Who are the Britons?
Yeah, Britain, post-Roman Britain, they lost all of their cities. They even lost the Potter's Wheel, which is so shocking that archaeologists don't believe it. And it's just like how the medieval Greenland Vikings didn't eat fish, and archaeologists don't believe it until all the facts point that in a land teeming with fish, they didn't eat fish. Well, in post-Roman Britain. In Roman Britain, they had highly specialized potter's shops that were shipping, professionally made bowls from Wales to Scotland, and Kent. And it was part of an overseas trading network. They were shipping tin to Syria, and it was all within the same country. It went from that to being not even having the potter's wheel.
Yeah.
And England, there's no writing, there's no firm dates, basically between 410 and like 600 in England.
Yeah.
There's no writing. And they lost their.
I shouldn't laugh.
They should, sure, we're all human. Who's going to be laughing at you?
Yeah, that's
These Americans had electricity and nuclear power and all this other shit. You have a harder landing than the Britons did.
Yeah. Well, Luke, to go back to your question, this gets to the bigger issue of sort of the way I see it. For me, the big thing, there's only hope if we see ourselves as a single species that evolved on this planet in a single small biosphere. And the problem is most people would rather believe something than understand. Simple as that. Yeah. If we could wake up to the fact that we are a single species, recently evolved, with this amazing power that didn't come from miracles, came from our human capabilities. And at the same time, those capabilities that led to all these problems gave us also reason, understanding, and the capacity for love.
Yeah.
And that's the only hope there is. And I'm not very hopeful. Is that off the mark too much, do you think?
No, yes and no, because there's no final point. There's no end point of like everybody has love now, and so everything's okay.
No, I understand that. But we are capable of it.
Absolutely, we are.
I mean, look at the Buddha. I mean, look at that. I mean, this was a pearl of wisdom. There will always be suffering.
Yes.
I mean, that's one of his insights.
Yeah.
I can do what I can do to relieve it.
Yeah.
Well, and now we have an understanding of who we are, where we came from, right? And we live in a very little, they call it the blue dot in this.
Yeah.
So I'm a humanist. I believe in reason and, trying to do this, not technology, reason and understanding who we are. That's the myth we need.
Right. I see it as like core, you can have traditions and curriculum that can teach what you just described to a core group of people.
Yeah.
But it has to have, in a way, harder borders
Yeah.
within that group of like, this is not about universality. This is about, it's kind of like the Bene Gesserit in the Dune universe, where seriously, like, or
It's very intentional in that
Yes.
in that canon.
we
right?
are here
It's a
to,
long program
yeah,
that is cultural, religious,
yeah,
religiously culture. It's a
yeah.
yeah. The scope and the intention is interesting.
Yeah.
I guess we don't have any real analog.
No, we don't. The closest analog, it's like we're here to help, but we're not here to transform or conquer.
Yeah.
We are Napoleon said it very well. The most difficult thing, and therefore the most important thing, and therefore the most difficult and dangerous, is to preserve the freedom to act. He meant that in a military context, but think about that's a mind like that conquered Europe and defeated everyone. Gave us that sentence that is so important, that is so utterly important. Preserve the freedom to act. That's what you have to do. And the closest analog we have to that is the Chinese Communist Party. Swear to fucking God. They don't let everybody in.
There's a I think there's a either concept, there's probably a proverb about it. And I can't remember what it's called, what the term they use is, but it's like, what is it? It's not initiative or something, but the idea being that if it's your turn, you want to be the one making the move.
Yeah.
It's like tennis. You trade serves, and if
Right.
you break someone on their serve, that's really good because you're trading games, right?
Yeah.
When you have serve, you have the power. So in Go, like if you can flip it, you make a move that requires a reaction.
Yes.
That means it's your turn again, and
Yep.
you get to continue. You having the freedom to act.
Yes.
Freedom to act.
Yeah, I can't remember. I'm sure there's a term for it in Japanese or Chinese, or maybe even
oh
a
my God.
proverb that goes along with it.
Oh,
but that's
Jesus.
what that makes me think of.
Yeah.
That's what he meant, right? Militarily, the
Yes.
freedom to act is not the freedom to react.
Correct.
The-
It's so important.
right.
And in a way, those two things couldn't be more different
Right,
in
right.
a way.
But as being raised in individualistic America,
Yeah.
when you said the freedom to act, I was thinking for the individual. You're not.
No.
Right.
He is saying just the opposite.
opposite
It's
of
for
that.
the leaders and the people in control of that culture. Give them the freedom to act.
Yes.
And that means a lot of other people don't have freedom.
That's correct.
Yeah.
And so and then it would get to the, like, act in what way? Like efficiency is not enough. Efficient for what?
Yeah.
And so, if democracy is serving the people and the interests of your civilization, then China's far more democratic than us.
Yeah.
And so maybe that's part of the reason why China is heavily developing this molten salt reactor.
Yeah.
Because they're going, wait a minute. We've been around 5,000 years, we being China. Let's give it another 5,000 just to see what happens. whereas the Western world discovered itself basically with colonialism.
Yeah.
Let's, Western, who we are, America, the current Western civilization, which is a self-labeled thing. We called ourselves that.
Yeah.
Muslim civilization would not call us Western civilization. They have inherited as much of the Roman heritage as Christianity.
Yeah.
The Muslim caliph in the year 800 is far more of a Roman emperor than even the Roman emperors sitting in Constantinople. And
Yeah.
that's not technically true, because he was a Roman emperor sitting in Constantinople, but they had as much a part of the legacy as what we call the Byzantine Empire.
Yeah.
So this Western civilization, this current thing that goes, we're the best, we're number one, superpower, all this other stuff, is killing itself because it just can't deal with the people who refuse to be colonized and are like, no, we're not gonna not gonna let Disney transform us, and we're not gonna listen to you, and we're not gonna have U.S. style elections, which are a farce already.
Yeah.
I've seen the Avengers. No, thank you.
There's a reason why the same story keeps getting told, and it's all about a bad guy has a plan, and then a team of the good guys get together and stop the bad guy having the plan. That story reinforces your own helplessness as a common person. Well, anybody who wants to change something must be bad.
Yeah.
It's an aristocratic story
Yeah.
that is told by aristocrats to support an aristocracy. When they lose control of the media, the story will change.
Yeah.
Or rather, when they lose control, losing control of the media will be part of it, and then we'll have these different sorts of stories being told.
Well, you would just say this. I think I mentioned this before. The apocryphal, probably not a true story, but when Chairman Mao was asked, what did he think of the American Revolution and the French Revolution? He says, too soon to say.
Yeah. Too soon to tell, yeah.
I haven't heard that one.
Yeah.
I've heard, what is it? Good idea. Oh, no. What's
Gandhi.
No,
Yeah.
yeah.
What do you think of Western
Yeah,
civilization?
yeah.
I think it'd be a good idea.
Right. Yeah. I like too soon to tell, though.
Yeah. And so we're destroying ourselves for what? Because, look at us. We aren't just destroying our own military, like banging our head into a brick wall in Afghanistan. We're destroying more than just our military. We're throwing our whole fucking financial system and social structure at Afghanistan. Stop fighting back. We conquered you. Sorry, for what? What's the return on investment for Afghanistan? We've been there 20 goddamn years, nothing to show for it. And what would victory look like? I had a moment of insight, and I swear to God this happened. This is another one of those moments to capture.
do it.
Here it is. I was rototilling my field with an old shitty rototiller that blew out my back and gave me shoulder pain. And I hit this fucking rock, and I was thinking about the war in Afghanistan and the other stuff, and I realized why. I realized what you would have to make an Afghan farmer in the countryside more afraid of to make them stop fighting, because that's what happens when you conquer it. Conquer a people, right? Like, our retribution may be worse, right? We're making you a deal you can't refuse. Our brutality is worse than your bid for freedom. And I know now what Afghan farmers are afraid of. Winter. They would have to be more afraid of U.S. soldiers than they are afraid of their own winter, because they're plowing fields with oxen, fields of stone. They're growing barley or something, or opium. And you're some Afghan farmer, you're up in the hills, and you've got 7 children, and 2 of them are going to die of starvation this winter. So until we make them more afraid of us than they are of winter, they will never stop fighting.
Yeah.
You can only understand certain things from the dirt. Ideas come out of the ground.
Right, the U.S. soldiers might threaten 1 out of 7 children, while the winter threatens 2 out of 7 children.
Yeah. Who's tougher? Who's a better mountain fighter?
And not just winter; it could be summer too. With the
Summer too.
No, really. With
I agree. I totally. Yes.
yeah, sure. So now you have. Obviously, you're just using a metaphor, but
Right.
I mean, they're going to look out for their kids.
Of course.
Yeah.
They're as human as us. They love each other just as
Sure.
much as us. And
Yeah.
and boy, we've shown the world our true colors. Who's afraid of the U.S. military?
Yeah.
So, molten salt reactors.
Right. So the alternative to the Dark Ages.
The alternative to the Dark Ages, or trying to control people ineffectually with your aging and ruined military system. Our military exists to exploit the labor of others. What if there's a source of energy that is 1,000,000 times more, that has 1,000,000 times the energy density of fossil fuels?
Yeah.
That's available to the world now. What's the point of our military, or what's the point of fossil fuels? The long-term economic effects of electricity so abundant it's basically free is as transformative as industrialization itself.
But to some sort of exponent, like...
Another, exponentially higher.
Right.
1,000,000 times. Like, there's a...
As transformative as industrialization, this thing would be...
Even more.
Yeah.
Yes.
a higher. I don't remember my calculus very well, but
the only two energy sources that have more energy than nuclear fission are fusion, which we don't know how to do yet, and you probably could never really use in a practical sense. And
So that's-
the one higher than that is antimatter matter collisions. So go for number 3, third place, boys.
Yeah. Yeah.
and with that much energy, that makes running things like a Large Hadron Collider a lot easier.
That's
you know.
right. Imagine a society that was pre-industrial trying to make a molten salt reactor. Ain't gonna happen.
Can't do it.
Yeah.
Right? You
If
can't.
you've got fossil fuels.
But if you have fossil fuels, it can leverage you to fission. So maybe after
Maybe
250 years of fission
Right.
civilization, then
Right.
you can get to your fucking fusion.
Yeah.
And
Right.
then fusion might bump you up to antimatter. I don't care. But you have to work up that ladder.
Yeah.
I go insane when I think about how many billions and billions of dollars have been spent on fusion research. I want to blow my head off.
But that's for weapons.
No, fusion.
Not for weapons.
No, energy fusion. You know,
Okay.
the tokamak.
Oh,
you know,
yeah,
the big,
okay,
the big
okay.
torus of plasma, and they're trying to do it. And I'm like, we talked about the load following with electricity and all that. Part of it's like, okay, if we could make fusion, then it would release all this energy. But
So that's building nuclei smaller than iron.
yes, fusing hydrogen to helium, basically. That's the main one.
Okay, right,
Which is the most energetic one, and that's the one that goes on in stars.
right.
You know. Well, okay, so now you've made fusion happen, but you have to pull heat out of it to even do anything useful, right? So you're
Yeah.
cooling it down. So it's the opposite. It has a positive reactivity coefficient. So you can't even.
So the molten salt is the
Yes.
only hope, the only realistic thing.
And it ties in everything. It's your heavy industry and your consumer industry of heating your house and driving your car. You know, you can make really cheap steel, but you can also make fuels that get the consumers to the products that they need.
And you said you could even use that energy to take CO2 out of the atmosphere.
It ties into your
Use that-
environmentalism.
Yeah.
You could balance the pH of the oceans with this. You could pull CO2 out of the atmosphere with this.
Yeah.
You could have 700 of these reactors making gasoline from air, and then another 200 permanently just pulling CO2 out, not even making gasoline, burying it in the ground. You could use it to desalinate water and make the desert bloom. Some of the it's imaginable that some of them could be remotely operated.
Yeah.
It's in the middle of the Sahara Desert, or it's on the Atlantic coast of the Sahara Desert, and you operate it by phone because nobody's even around. Even if it shuts down, it's like, oh, whoops, start it up again.
Right.
Then we'll send somebody.
And it's really easy to imagine too in a situation where energy is effectively free.
Yes.
It's really easy to imagine the automation that you
Yeah.
could leverage. you
Yeah,
know.
straight up. It would be the knock-on effects, the snowballing effects of this.
Someone only has to show up when some little sensor goes off and goes clank
Yeah.
and drops a ball in a little spiral tube, and then it hits a bell, and
Yeah.
then some. Oh, I better go turn it off and turn it on again,
Yeah.
and then we'll be good.
He'd be a sysadmin. He lives
right.
He
I have
lives.
nothing to do until something blows up.
Yes,
right.
he lives in Marrakesh with his family and his wife, you know. And then he's in charge of a molten salt reactor 400 miles to the south that's running a desalination plant. Okay, that's pouring water into a farm, a greenhouse or something. And he goes, oh, he gets a notification on his phone.
Yeah.
He hops into a plane. The plane is fueled by liquid fuels made by these molten salt reactors, so it's carbon dioxide free. He flies down. He goes, oh shit, and he flips the switch and melts the salt again, and then it fires up the reactor,
Right.
and then he flies back home. And he does it all with a clean conscience because he's not only not hurting the planet, he's making the desert bloom.
Yeah.
Because the desert is blooming, we were able to restore to wilderness areas that had been farms. Understand?
Yeah.
You know, like certain environment. There's a lot of desert in the world. Is that wilderness? Sure, cool. There's less than 1% of temperate grassland because temperate grassland is good for crops. So people plowed it all up and destroyed it. Well, if you make 10% of the desert into farmland because you have molten salt reactor with desalination, you can return 10% of temperate grassland back into grassland and restore this habitat that humanity destroyed before they even had electricity.
Right.
There's a reason why.
But before plate tectonics, let alone soil science, basically.
Yeah, there's a reason why Europeans colonized the same band of land around the world, and they didn't colonize the rainforest. They didn't colonize the rainforest for the same reason they didn't colonize the deep ocean. It's not good habitat for European civilization. There's a band of European settlement left over from colonialism.
It's
called
just
North America, but it's also Argentina and South Africa and Australia. What a coincidence.
Yeah.
And only certain parts of Australia. Isn't that weird?
Yeah.
So when the Europeans, the British, landed in Australia, the first thing they did, they said, oh, look at how the native people live. Okay, and so they took off their clothes and put on loincloths and picked up boomerangs and settled Australia. Bullshit. No,
They're not adapting. They're finding the things closest to the niche.
Yes.
That they already grew out of.
Yes.
And vice versa.
They wanted to make the whole world England. Good luck.
Yeah, they can't.
They can't, and it failed.
They can just settle the places that their puzzle shape already fits into.
Yes.
Of course.
They didn't evolve into South Africans. They said, no, we're going to make you like us. And Australia, and look what's happening now. Nature's biting back, ain't she? Australians, what are you going to do? You can either walk into the sea, or you can live as if you are on Australia.
Yeah. You can't keep pretending that it's...
Isn't it weird that we say African Americans, but we don't say European Americans?
Yeah.
Isn't that odd?
Yeah.
What a coincidence.
Yeah.
We don't say European Australians, but we say Aboriginal Australians.
Yeah.
So who's the liar? Where's the lie hiding in the language in plain sight?
Yeah.
These European Americans need to get their act together. These European Canadians. Asian Americans. They're from Asia. The arrow broke against its target in China.
Yeah.
And we still didn't get the fucking memo. We're sitting there fighting. It's still happening. We expect, to this day, in the year 2020, we expect them to behave as if we can colonize them.
Yeah.
And what's going to happen instead is our economy is going to collapse because it's based on a shrinking resource called fossil fuels.
Yeah.
And they're going to sit there and just leapfrog past us and be like, yeah, by the way, our heavy manufacturing has a free electricity source.
Yeah.
So go ahead and smelt your aluminum and your steel. The arrow broke against its target, and European colonialism couldn't even understand that it was happening.
Yeah.
And we still literally do not.
You get most optimistic when you talk about China.
I do.
I'm a cinephile. You understand?
Right? Yeah,
I
me
don't
too.
like the system they have in many ways.
No.
But I'm in love with Chinese people and their culture. I really am. You get most optimistic. What if they fuck up? I mean,
And
what
we're
are the chances? I mean,
you're right, because they fucked up in the past.
Yeah.
We have very good historical examples of them screwing up.
yeah.
You know, as long as what would have to happen to make it a permanent fuck up would be the loss of the Chinese peasants. I don't know how that's possible outside of a meteor strike.
Well, what about the trend in I don't know how many decades, but the whole trend of the rural migrating to the
There's
urban.
half as many people living in cities now as there is in the countryside.
Yeah,
And that's changed a lot in the last 50 years.
yeah, in China. Yeah,
Yeah.
Yeah.
So isn't that
It's not
the
good.
loss of the peasantry? You know.
It's a diminishment of it, but it's not a loss. As long as they are there, like you see those pictures of those villages and the karst geography and
And,
stuff.
and the rice paddies
Yeah.
that are carved into the hillside. And,
As
Yeah,
long as
I
that's
fuck with
there.
some Attenborough shit and
Yeah.
watch some sparrows fly in to open. You know.
Yeah.
Remember that one?
Yeah, I do. Yeah.
Pretty lovely.
Yeah.
But, you know, that's a TV show. It's really easy to put it on and go, wow. Ah, wow, how
Yeah.
beautiful. What a way of life, you know.
Because, I mean, the communist revolution fits in the pattern of dynastic rise and fall more closely than it does with any theoretical international socialism. Really, truly, like the communists are closer to the Yellow Turban Rebellion or the Red Turban Rebellion or these others that were tsunamis of people that rose up from the countryside and swept down to the coast.
That's a better way to understand
Yes.
it than this sort of 20th century
Yeah.
Ideology,
economic.
rather the Western ideology of Marxism.
Right.
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 Yeah.
I really mean that. So,
Yeah.
like, I mean, I'm reading Romance of the Three Kingdoms right now, and the yellow turbans just keep showing up. It's
Yeah.
really interesting. And then there was another yellow turban. It's like it's not even a single structure. It's a mass. It's a superorganism.
Yeah.
So as long as that superorganism exists, it doesn't matter how much they fuck up. It's
Yeah.
really strange.
Yeah.
I don't know how else to say it.
Yeah.
But it's like I don't know how. It's like saying, what if there's no people?
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
But it's so interesting because what Marxism is a Western ideology. That Stalin is supposed to have said, and you've probably heard this about Chairman Mao and the communists. That's not communism. Serious. I mean, because it probably wasn't. It was
No.
everything becomes cinified. As we hear
Yes.
that in history all the time. Everything is changed into what you're arguing.
Yes,
is.
that's what
It
I'm
is
saying.
the farmers.
That's precisely what I'm saying.
Yeah.
It is. They're doing it, and it's almost like they just can't help it. There was a group of Jewish settlers from like the time of the Tang Dynasty, the 800s and 900s, who settled in the city of Kaifeng,
Okay.
and they were assimilated by the Chinese,
Yeah.
which is almost unheard of.
Yeah.
The Jews are one of the least assimilable people in the world. They're amazing. It's just this incredibly beautiful culture
Yeah.
that sticks to itself. We talked about the Bene Gesserit and like not letting everyone in, being in the world but not of it, right? We're not like, it's like that. No, I mean, the world really should learn. If you want to be a group of people who has longevity, you better learn from the Jews. You know, how did they do it? But Chinese culture assimilated those Jews.
Yeah.
For a while, they didn't eat pork. There was a synagogue they had, but it would look like a pagoda,
Yeah.
and they eventually disappeared into the population. That is extraordinary. A militant, I shouldn't even say it, a person who's very proud, a Jew who's extremely proud of their tradition, should find that very disturbing.
Yeah.
They're not supposed to assimilate. It's not supposed to happen. It's not right.
Yeah.
It's never really happened before.
Right, but it did happen to this group, and so it should be very disturbing to a militant, Jewish person.
Orthodox. Yeah.
Yeah, Orthodox.
So.
And I think that if some people really like living in cities, and cities are always going to be with us, but a lot of people also like living in the countryside, and country boys love the country. If this molten salt reactor gets rolled out, it will revitalize the countryside. Truly.
That's good for a lot of people.
That's good for a lot of people because it will make you don't have to work by
I've heard
hand.
a lot of songs about it, in
Right?
fact.
Yeah.
Even Confucius, I mean, the Book of Songs.
Yeah. Yeah. And it would, I think, from the feeling I get when I read Farmers of 40 Centuries and From the Soil, is like there's Chinese farmers really love their land, and they really have an appreciation for what they're doing. A molten salt reactor would unleash their productivity in a way. It's not just like, oh, now we make even more rice, but it would ease their standard of living tremendously. You know,
So you get
because if electricity is basically free, so could your liquid fuels. And those liquid fuels are scrubbed from carbon dioxide from the air.
they can power your rototillers.
Your rototillers and whatnot. So you can live a really nice... there's a reason why...
You can still be tied to your land.
Yes. but your standard of living is much higher because you're not subsistence anymore.
Right.
You don't have to depend on the energy content of the rice or the millet to power your civilization.
And if
you
get a bad harvest one year, you don't have to throw yourself in the river or whatever.
Yeah. If this molten salt reactor was rolled out on a major scale, human population would go up for the exact same reason that fossil fuels made the human population go up. We peaked at 2 billion people, and then fossil fuels happened on a major way. What?
Well, the fossil fuel, the boon that was a curse of the fossil fuels, it gave us the means to live outside our means.
Yes.
Right? Is there a danger here in...
Yes, of course. That's why you have to have wisdom. There's no substitute for wisdom. No, you're absolutely right.
Where do you can't go to the store and buy wisdom, though.
Yeah.
And you can't even manufacture it.
And you can't have too many people.
You
for
can't
the planet.
write a good enough poem
Yeah, I know.
and put it on the internet to make sure everyone's wise now.
I know. I don't know. You're not wrong. There's actually a paradox in economics that from a biologist's perspective is not a paradox at all. It's called Jevons paradox. The more efficiently you use something, the more of it you use. You don't use less, you use more. From a biological perspective, it's like, well, no fucking shit.
No, you pass on your genes.
Yes.
Yeah.
There's two photosynthesis systems. One of them is 10% more efficient than the other. Which one prevails?
Yeah.
It's not a paradox.
Yeah.
So if we start using these molten salt reactors if the same legacy of colonialism is still in charge of global capital, they will use this molten salt reactor to wreak more havoc and evil on the poor people of the world.
Well, see, my fear is not capitalism. It's something more intrinsic to human social nature.
Yes.
And that's the problem. It's not capitalism. It's not white guys.
I agree.
It's the systems that do this.
I agree.
And it's because the way we are.
Yes. But colonialism rewarded the worst angels of our nature.
Yeah.
And we haven't come to terms with that yet.
Yeah.
And so it'd be like saying, should the Mongol Empire come back?
Yeah.
They imposed peace
Yeah.
from Poland to Vietnam. No, of course not.
No.
And so you have to look at European colonialism and the current world setup we have as a temporary phenomenon. It's not universal, and lo and behold, isn't it strange that England went from being a globalizing force and now they're in pell-mell retreat with Brexit and all this, and now Brexit is real? Isn't that odd? So did they support globalism or not? It's the same with the United States. If we can't dominate, we don't even want to interact. Whereas,
It's either domination or isolation.
yes, Noam Chomsky said it very well: hegemony or survival. So, if the United States developed this molten salt reactor, suddenly, let's say our economy recovered and we were producing a lot of things again and flooding world markets with our goods, we would suddenly rediscover our globalization, wouldn't we?
Yeah.
But if poor people get it, if China gets it and they give it and they hold on to it and release it to their poor allies of really poor countries like in sub-Saharan Africa or the Middle East or something, then they will use the energy of this molten salt reactor to throw off the yoke of European colonialism. What does that mean? That's a highly metaphorical thing. What does that mean? What it means is Wall Street won't be able to tell them what to do. Wall Street will not control world capital.
Yeah.
It means the Pentagon can say whatever the fuck it wants and they can't do anything with their military.
Yeah.
It means New York City will not be a cultural center. It means that Disney movies and Hollywood will become little niche things that are not a global force of culture.
Yeah.
That's what it means. And it's already beginning. Like, it is already beginning. even with before the molten salt reactor, just the fact that China culturally is this juggernaut that we can't conquer. I mean, some of these, you talked about Rush Limbaugh. Like, if I had my way, I'd just ship him off to China, let them assimilate. He could sit there and slobber all he wants into a microphone. I mean, that's what I want. All these right wingers that we have that sit there and spout about Western Civ, I would exile them to China, just send them to Chengdu or something, get a job, even give them a stipend, and just watch and watch
better food.
Better food, yeah. Watch their minds just melt away because they live in a fantasy world that they're all and it's a fantasy, and so they have to keep shoring it up because things keep breaking in, and it's like, well, eventually you'll have to just admit that you're a human being, not the master race. Oh. I mean, what happens when people who think that they're the master race confront a civilization that is older, stronger, wiser than them? The cognitive dissonance is just emanating at this point. We have no idea what to do. There is no mental construct we have to think about this. Yeah. Why don't we behave rationally towards Russia? Russia is 1,000 years old.
Yeah. You said the worst angels of our nature.
Human nature.
Yeah. Pinker has a book, The Better Angels of Our Nature, who's argued things gotten a lot better.
I agree with that.
Yeah. And that's because of science, evidence, and not. It's because of humanism. It's not because of belief in miracles.
Yes.
Or in some pattern of history where either God is pulling us that way or the forces of history are pushing us that way. I mean, that's what I think. I mean, really, all of these ideologies, fascism, communism, Marxism, and capitalism, all argue we can get better because there's a struggle against either individuals, races, or classes.
Right.
And that's a Western ideology, which is what gives me hope is that Chinese hasn't adopted that Western automatic idea of progress. You understand?
Yes.
Yeah.
I mean, communism does have that idea, but has it penetrated into what's stronger, the China or the communism?
Yeah. And this is where when Stalin says that's not communism, it's because it's Chinese. It's not a Western idea that there's somehow this history that automatic Chinese. When I had very little up here in the intellectual sense about Chinese history, I know a lot about details and stuff like that, but the Chinese history sees things in cycles. Is what I was learned. Oh, things are going to get worse, then they're going to get better. They're going to it's this cycle that they see things in, rather than this continuous bullshit that I was taught as a young student, even in college, even in religion classes, where somehow automatically it all leads to Western white males. I mean, that's what I got.
It's where the arrow of progress
Here's
points.
The opening line for Romance of the Three Kingdoms. Empires wax and wane, states cleave asunder and coalesce.
There we go. I mean, it's just sort of they know it's not always going to be this.
Yeah.
But there is going to always be China, I guess. I don't know.
Yeah. And as a scientist, I appreciate not literally forever, truly, like eventually the earth will not exist. Eventually human beings will not exist. I understand that. But I cannot, in any scenario except a meteor strike, find any penciled out scenario where China doesn't exist.
As long as there are humans, there is.
Yes. Yeah. I pretty much mean it. Like, I can't imagine. Like, well, I can't pencil out a scenario where the United States exists in 200 years.
That's why you call it Cascadia.
Yeah.
This region, but I'll tell a good example of that. My wife, who is from China, I married her in China. She's lived here now for 30 years.
What sort of ceremony did you have?
She hates the Communist Party. She hates Chairman Mao. But she is so proudly Chinese.
Huh.
I mean, not in this sense that we're talking about. Well, in the sense we're talking about, there is something in her blood that comes from the culture.
Mm.
I mean,
Yes.
I mean, it really is. I mean, she is more concerned now about the coronavirus and not just for China, but for the world. I mean, that's what she does. And but Sidney Rittenberg said, you know, he lived there for 50 years.
Mm.
He said, even after that time, they never accepted me as Chinese, as a real Chinese. I mean, he never was accepted in the sense that he's. You understand?
Yes.
So
Even as
there's-
an insider.
Huh?
Even as an insider
No,
in the
even as an
party and
insider,
everything.
yeah. Even as an insider, it was sort of that this culture creates this, and it's not a superiority thing.
I agree.
It's a pride.
Yes.
I mean, I think that's what you're saying.
That's exactly what and I detect, like, I realize, like, I check the people's daily, you know, speaking of communism, but there's a...
How often? Sorry, that's a
Oh,
bad joke.
Twice a day.
Because it's called, yeah. Go on.
Common. There's an element of conservatism in it that is far more in Chinese. So I should really bracket what I'm saying. There's an element of conservatism in Chinese culture that is far deeper than any ideological conservatism in the West that I've ever encountered. It's just like, this is who we are.
Yeah.
We've been this for a very long time. We're not going to let outside. We will respect you. We will learn from you.
Yeah.
We will share
yeah.
what we want with you with great pride and love. And we will also appreciate your culture as well. But you will never be us, you know, and that's fine.
Yeah.
We don't want you to be like us. We don't want you to really try. We want you to appreciate. Whereas conservatism in the West is almost an ideology. It's almost something you have to assume. I chose to be conservative. That's not the
That's
case.
funny because it makes me think of a word that I hear all the time and occasionally use, but you just helped me understand it better when people say reactionary.
Yes.
What you're describing is something completely devoid of reactionary
Yes,
conservatism. They're not conservative as a gut reaction to some sort of threat or it's the opposite of that.
Yeah. So
It's embedded.
Right.
It's embedded.
what I just described for China also exists for Russia and France.
Yeah.
You know, it's like you can be an anarchist, you can be a monarchist, but you're all French.
You have to.
Underneath all of it is a
Interesting.
Frenchness
Yeah.
that transcends all political boundaries and ideologies. You know, and
It's
when
hard. It's hard for me to think about
exactly
because I
yeah.
happened to be born in a country that was just
Yes, that's exactly what I'm saying.
a state, I should say, that was just founded a
this
couple
may
weeks
sound-
ago.
This
Yeah.
may sound flippant, but it's here. What you are is a white male. I mean, that's what we're raised to be.
Yeah, we are.
I mean, that really is what our culture has done.
I'm racist. It was just so passively done. You know?
Passively. Me too.
And it was, and I didn't. I mean, here I'm not racist, but I did. My sister is ethnically Korean, and I didn't know how racist I was towards black people until I realized I don't see East Asians because she was my sister. She was there when I was a baby. You know,
Yeah.
like she's older than me, and so.
Yeah.
It's not something I identify any more than I look in the mirror and say, "Oh, those are Caucasian traits." But you know, growing up where I grew up, I do see black people. You know, and it was just a passively embedded racism of like, "Oh, they're the other. They're different."
Yeah.
I suppose if my sister was ethnically African, I would see East Asians and just reverse it. But it's there in the culture, and it's just. I mean, Disney is the worst for this of just like weird passive racism in many of their.
Yeah.
That's what kills me about even like something that's sort of happening. Oh boy, this is dangerous territory, but like it's getting something that's happening now as what?
Microphone.
Is PC culture is kind of becoming. You can be, as long as you're still in the empire of colonialism and the legacy of colonialism, you can be anybody, but you still have to support. Underneath all of it is the support of this colonial structure.
It's sort of a superstructure on the racism. It's sort of saying, oh, I think everybody should have an opportunity as an individual.
Right.
Right? I mean,
Right.
an emphasis on the individual rather than the
Yeah.
group again.
As long as you accept the
No,
same
I-
ruling
I
class
think-
and the same colonial arrangements,
think
you
you're
can
right.
have any skin color.
Yeah, you're
Like,
right. And I think some people would say that's a problem with the left.
Yeah, it is.
Yeah,
There isn't that
everything is
aspect.
okay, but they're still doing the same thing.
Right, and you get to the point, like, what's going to happen is unless everything collapses because of peak oil and all this other crap, after we've concluded the global war on terror, whatever.
After we win,
after
Cool.
we win, you'll see
mission accomplished.
right?
Landing on an aircraft carrier.
Yeah. Well, you saw it with the Obama presidency. That's what was driving me insane, because it's like he destroyed Libya.
Yeah.
He destroyed it.
Yeah.
He bombed them into
What do you
collapse.
mean? When did we declare war with Libya?
Right? But you couldn't say anything because it's like, okay, now there's a black president, but he's still completely 100% for the empire.
Yeah.
It's so bad. It's so fucking bad. So
What war?
Yeah.
Sorry.
Does Libya have oil?
Yes. Oh yeah.
Of course. That's the reason.
Well, it was. Well, yeah. Partly. Yeah.
Partly.
I swear to what. Apparently, like the. I mean, this is from 2011, but apparently, I mean, Gaddafi was part of that circle, that incestuous circle jerk of our ruling classes, globalist elites, as much as any of them.
Yeah.
There's pictures of him shaking hands with Sarkozy and Bush and all this other stuff. And apparently, after we...
Sarkozy. Oh,
Yeah.
yeah. His wife's a pretty good songwriter, actually.
Is she,
Yeah.
she,
Her name escapes me right now, but she. Yeah, anyway.
with the Arab Spring, and there was an uprising against him, and we overshot our UN mandate way too far. Apparently, they caught, like, one of Gaddafi's sons or something called somebody in France and said, "What are you doing?" That says it all right there. Like, hey, come on, we're all part of the same hypocrisy. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And you want to know how China could really fuck up is if they join that circle.
Wait, what were you talking about with the? Oh, you called it a.
Incestuous circle jerk.
No.
Oh.
Before that, in the first act of our conversation, it was sort of a funny pre the Bronze Age collapse.
Oh, the Club of Great Powers.
Club of Great Powers.
Yeah,
right.
yeah. History doesn't repeat, but it rhymes.
Right.
Like. And so, yeah, the danger, the real danger is China. That aspect of China becoming real cynical. In that sense, this weird knee-jerk, xenophobic, racist response of America to China is actually maybe better for China than, oh, come in, welcome to the fold. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like, damn, you Westerners really are pieces
We
of
don't
shit.
want them to want to join the club.
Yes,
it's
that's
a bad
exactly right.
club.
It's a bad club.
It
Don't do
sucks.
Yeah.
The sooner this club is disbanded, the better.
Yes, and
So-
sometimes ruling structures do just disintegrate.
Right.
Oh,
So that would be worst case scenario.
yeah, it would.
It's our time. We've earned it. You all
Yeah.
got to burn your coal forever and be colonial powers forever.
Yeah.
Now we get to burn our coal and be colonial
Yeah.
powers.
And I don't
It's
think
our
they'll do it.
turn.
I don't think they'll do colonialism. Certainly not European style.
Well, I don't think they will either. If you look at the map of the world from 2,000 years ago and today, China, and of course people will object to Tibet being part of it, and
Right.
Taiwan.
Yeah.
Look at where the United States was 2,000 years ago.
I don't-
Look where it was 200 years ago.
Yeah.
Look, it's
It
going
wasn't a wink. It
Yeah,
wasn't
and
a
now
gleam in
it's
its
in
father.
eastern, western, northern, and southern hemisphere, and it's expressing its power everywhere.
Yeah,
I mean, there's a huge difference,
yeah.
and people don't understand that.
No, and there just comes a point where it's like, yeah, the British Empire, the sun never set upon it. Okay.
You know why?
Because God never trusted the English in the dark.
That's it.
Yeah. You know, and now it's like, is it even a United Kingdom? Because the Scottish are pissed. They're like, fuck this Brexit, you know.
Yeah.
We don't, you know. And so we've got a whole lot of debt. And we don't have any fossil fuel. There's 3 ways you can support your national currency. One is to have an extremely effective government and a hard-working, efficient people.
Check. Oh, sorry.
Oh, whoops. Yeah. China has that. We don't. The second way is to have a big pile of precious metals that, you know, make your currency convertible to precious metals at, you know, usually higher than market rates. And the third one is to back it up with an energy source. That's how Saudi Arabia does it. Saudi Arabia doesn't manufacture anything, so why are they rich? Oh, I don't know. I don't know, Adam. But, I mean, Jesus Christ. So...
Why are they so fucking rich?
Yeah. We don't have enough fossil fuels to push up to support our debt, to be a foundation for our debt. So... And we don't have a hard-working, efficient people and an efficient government. Yeah. And we don't have much gold anymore. Not if you look at the pile of gold we have in Fort Knox, however much that is, you know, who knows, versus the pile of national debt and whatever we have, it's like, okay, the price of gold per ounce would have to be like $50,000 per ounce to back it up. Okay.
Yeah.
China has all 3 of those things. So at a certain point, what's going to happen to the American empire is it will just be bought out. Just liquidate the assets.
It's not very
and
dramatic.
the rich people in America will benefit.
Yes.
Yeah.
Who is going to sell us to China? Our own ruling class.
Yeah.
They already have.
Yeah.
You know, you'd have to resurrect
Hard.
American democracy. Strong unions, strong manufacturing base. We have a tremendous amount of other resources besides fossil fuels, but it's too late.
Socialism in the sense that is people would understand that it's a decent thing.
Mercantile socialism, where you protect your national economy. Bring manufacturing back to, I don't know, Detroit.
Yeah.
You know, like, fuck, guys, it's too late.
Yeah.
And so what'll happen is they'll print there. As we speak, the stock market collapse because of coronavirus might be happening. Who knows? But they'll have to print more money to cover it up. That dilutes the power of your currency. That means people with real currency are able to buy assets at fire sale prices.
Yeah.
So the American economy will be liquidated by other people. Like, oh, cool. We would like to buy Silicon Valley. 10 cents on the dollar.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Yeah.
There'll be a brain drain. There'll be a liquidation of hard physical assets like the factory I work at that makes good carbon fiber. Cool. We'll buy it. Here you go. And then we'll go back to a kind of a non-manufacturing economy.
You had one typo in there, or
Sorry.
misspoke. You said if the coronavirus is happening, you mean the pandemic is happening. That's what you meant.
No,
the virus
he said the
Yeah.
stock market collapse.
But he also said if the virus.
Yeah, right.
Yeah,
Fair,
it really is happening.
It is happening.
And people are dying, and the viruses could give a shit less about what you think or I think. And we better trust the people that understand that stuff.
Yeah.
DNA does what it does.
I mean, it's all fun and games to trash Chinese authoritarianism until you need it to stop a virus.
Yeah.
No, you can't tell your people what to do. That's tyranny.
Yeah.
Until there's a big fat virus like
Yeah.
this, and we go, oh, please. You know, we're gonna have to imitate them to deal with this when it
But
comes.
what also points out a problem with Chinese bureaucracy is that those local officials didn't want this to get out.
Yeah.
I mean, this
Oh,
is
yeah. No,
this is
you're not
human
wrong.
nature.
Yes.
Yeah. I mean, it really is. It's a big problem. Speaking the truth in China is not easy when
No,
it
it
comes to things like that.
No.
Even here.
Yeah. I mean, here, what we're talking about is like the collapse of our ruling classes.
Yeah.
Oh. Great. See, that always
Oh.
that's always such a bloodless problem, you know?
Yeah.
And it all ties to, I mean, yeah, I wanted this to be more about the molten salt reactor, and in a way it kind of is. Like, what do we say if you want to understand organism, you have to understand its food source and the average size. If you understand the average size of an adult animal of a species and its food source, you can almost describe it.
Within a group, mammals versus ectotherms.
Sure.
And,
Yeah.
yeah, sure.
Well, if you want to understand a society, you understand where its energy comes from and who's the ruling class, which pigs get their snouts in the trough first. Who's the ruling class that's privileged above everybody
Yeah.
else? So if it's
And most people are runts.
most people, yeah, that's just the nature of the beast.
Yeah.
So if you're a small city state that depends on trade and has no agricultural base, you can describe it because you know the size, you know the energy source, trade. You know who gets access to the energy first, an aristocratic ruling class of merchants like Venice, Genoa, Amalfi. If it's a huge country with an agricultural base and its ruling classes who get privileged access are a Mandarin elite, you've got China, you've got Imperial Egypt, you've got any of the others. And our ruling class has failed badly. And we can't decide who we are as a nation, and that's why we're facing this real conundrum that if you're Russia or China, if it's three guys in Russia having this conversation, you are not talking about the disintegration of Russia. That's not even an idea. Like, oh, okay, I guess hypothetically that could happen, but we have fast spectrum breeder nuclear reactors, and we have so much oil and natural gas we can export it to everybody, and we have all the agriculture and mineral wealth we could possibly use. We have more land. They have land that's not even under cultivation. That's excellent stuff. They're not talking about the disintegration of Russia. We actually are talking about the disintegration of the United States and the whole Western paradigm. Whoo! Damn.
I think we should stop.
Yeah. Bum, bum,
Do we get to do it again?